Something chaotic is happening within the Iranian government right now. It is something that produces no smoke or fire and leaves no bomb craters. Yet, it is erasing every layer of power from a regime built over 4 decades. On April 22nd, four events occurred simultaneously. Washington extended the ceasefire. The IRGC opened fire on civilian cargo ships. 51 nations met in London to prepare for a takeover of the Strait of Hormuz. And Trump posted publicly that Iran is losing $500 million a day. Its military is unpaid, and the regime is crying for help. And the most terrifying part isn't that these four events happened on the same day. It's that they are not contradictory. They are forefronts of the same strategy. Because the US didn't enter this confrontation with military power alone. The US came with something for which Iran has no defensive tools: the calculated patience of a party that knows time is on its side. Stay tuned, because by the end of this analysis video, you will understand exactly why the US decision to stop firing is a more dangerous weapon than any missile, why the IRGC is self-destructing its own negotiating position, why 51 nations are preparing for a new order at Hormuz without consulting Tehran, and why what is happening at the world's narrowest strait could be the blueprint for how the US deals with every adversary for decades to come. This is Ryan Mitchell. Before we get to the incident where Iran opened fire and seized two civilian cargo ships, let's start with a decision many consider a concession, but which is actually more dangerous than any attack. On April 22nd, the Trump administration announced an indefinite extension of the ceasefire with Iran. The official reason given: the Iranian government is in a state of severe internal fracture, unable to present a unified proposal, and Pakistani mediators requested Washington give Tehran more time. Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif publicly thanked Trump for this decision. Trump, for his part, hid nothing, stating bluntly that the US is ready to use force if there is no deal, that there is no time frame set for this conflict, and that the discussion will end in one of two ways: by agreement or by force. Meanwhile, in Washington, the US Senate rejected for the fifth consecutive time a bill to limit Trump's war powers against Iran by a vote of 40-1. Not the first time, not the second time, but the fifth time. The reaction from Tehran was immediate. Iranian state media called the extension decision a plot to buy time for a surprise attack. Parliament Speaker Galaba declared the extension meaningless and stated bluntly that an economic blockade is no different from bombing. Foreign Minister Arachi accused the US of violating commitments and asserted that the blockade and threats are the main obstacles preventing progress in negotiations. Now, let's pause here for a moment, because those reactions contain more information than any intelligence report. To understand why the US decision to extend this ceasefire is not a concession, but a weapon, you need to understand this simple mechanism. Every day the ceasefire is extended is another day the economic blockade remains in effect. Another day, $500 million continues to evaporate from the IRGC's accounts. And another day, internal pressure within the Tehran regime continues to escalate without the US having to trigger anything else. Washington doesn't need to break the Iranian regime from the outside. They only need to create enough conditions for that regime to break itself from within. And Tehran's reaction is proving exactly that this is happening. When Galab says the blockade is no different from bombing, he isn't just describing US tactics. He is inadvertently pointing exactly to where the regime is most vulnerable. Not missiles, not airstrikes, but the drying up of cash flow. This is extremely valuable information, and Trump knows how to exploit it. The statement on Truth Social about Iran losing 500 millions a day, about the military and police not being paid, about the regime crying for help. These are not random comments from a president who likes to post on social media. They are carefully calculated messages sent directly into the IRGC's internal circles, aimed at deepening the simmering conflicts among generals who see their accounts shrinking every day. When you tell the whole world publicly that a regime's security forces are not being paid, you aren't just describing reality. You are questioning the loyalty of the people holding the guns to protect that regime, and you are doing it in front of those very people. Meanwhile, on the US side, the Senate's fifth rejection of the War Powers Limitation Bill is a signal of Washington's internal political stability. While Tran falls into a state described by its own officials as a severe fracture, unable to produce a unified proposal. Two governments are moving on two completely opposite trajectories. One is consolidating, the other is disintegrating. And Washington understands better than anyone that in a strategic confrontation, the side that maintains internal unity longer will be the one to decide the outcome. The clock is ticking, and it is ticking in favor of the US. Every day of delay is a day the IRGC loses more financial resources to maintain the loyalty of its forces. Every day of extension is a day the Thran regime must face the question of whether the people holding the guns to protect this system will continue to do so when that system can no longer pay them. This is something that bombs and bullets cannot create. But to understand why that pressure is working at a pace that even perhaps didn't fully predict, you need to understand one truth about the IRGC. The IRGC is not a pure military force. It is an economic empire in uniform through a network of hundreds of front companies and big net organizations. Revolutionary charitable foundations established after 1979 that quickly turned into massive business conglomerates. The IRGC controls an estimated 30 to 50% of Iran's GDP. Construction, telecommunications, energy, seaports, the import of essential goods all have the IRGC's fingerprints on them. And here is the most important detail. Approximately 30 to 40% of Iran's oil exports run through front companies directly controlled by the IRGC, not through the official government budget. When you understand that, you finally understand why the economic blockade is not just an attack on the Iranian economy in general. It is a direct attack on the RGC's financial lifeblood from three directions simultaneously. The first direction is port revenue. Before the blockade, the IRGC collected fees from ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz, a direct cash collection mechanism that bypassed any auditing agency. The second direction is oil revenue, with 30 to 40% of oil exports running through IRGC front companies. Every day of the blockade is a day that revenue returns to zero. The third direction is import revenue. The IRGC controls a monopoly on the import of many essential goods when cargo ships cannot enter Iranian ports. That import empire is also paralyzed. The numbers reflect this exactly. Iran is losing $500 million a day from oil exports and maritime trade. The central bank of Iran has had to warn of 180% inflation, a number that if you placed it in any economy in the world, you would immediately understand as a signal of a system on the brink of total collapse, not just experiencing difficulties. President Zoskian himself had to warn internally that without a ceasefire, Iran's economy could completely collapse within weeks, not months, weeks. The military and police are complaining about not being paid, and U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent confirmed the U.S. Navy will continue the blockade under Trump's orders while warning that Karg Island, the island that handles 90% of Iran's crude oil exports, is about to reach full storage capacity. And when that happens, Iranian oil wells will have to shut down. Since the blockade began, 28 ships have been forced to turn back or return to port. And to ensure that number continues to rise without military escalation, the US is maintaining a surveillance complex that Iran has no tools to counter. KC-135 Strato tankers continuously refuel P-8 Pazidans in midair, creating a 24/7 uninterrupted presence, scanning the entire waters with advanced radar and electro-optical sensors from an altitude where no ship can escape observation. This is not escalation. This is economic pressure reinforced by a permanent military presence. The two combined to create a tightening noose with no escape point. Now look at what is happening inside the regime as a direct consequence of all this. When cash flow dries up, power doesn't collapse in a military fashion. There are no great battles, no captured capitals. It disintegrates through internal blame shifting, through factions beginning to recalculate whether loyalty to whom will be more beneficial in an increasingly uncertain future. The loyalty of security forces to any regime in the world is not maintained by ideology. It is maintained by stable wages, by economic privileges, by the feeling that loyalty to this system will secure the future for oneself and one's family. When those things start to disappear, that calculation changes. And the emerging conflict between President Soshi and the IRGC's leadership is the clearest evidence that this calculation is starting to shift. Pezeskian wants a deal. He understands that without a deal, there is no economy, and without an economy, there is no regime. The IRGC wants to continue because for them, every concession in negotiations is a piece of power, permanently stripped away, and they would rather face economic collapse than accept a deal that erases the financial empire they spent 4 decades building. This is a sign of the fracture in what analysts call Iran's dual system. The parallel power structure between the elected civilian government and the unelected security institutions that has existed for 40 years. That system used to work because both sides had enough resources to maintain their domains. When resources dry up, that balance breaks, and the strategic message here goes far beyond Iran's borders. For any regime in the world that builds its power structure on an economic foundation, on resource monopolies, on a network of state-owned companies, on cash flow from energy exports, Iran is becoming a living lesson in what happens when that foundation is attacked systematically and continuously. To strip away money is to strip away power, and the economic blockade maintained at a much lower cost than a full-scale military campaign is proving that this is the most effective coercive tool a superpower can deploy in the 21st century. While economic pressure is crushing the IRGC from within, an event occurred on the same day, April 22nd, which if you only read the headlines, you would completely misunderstand its significance. On the same day, Trump extended the ceasefire. The IRGC sent high-speed boats into the Strait of Hormuz, approached 2 international container ships without any warning, opened fire on the bridge, and seized both. The UK Maritime Trade Operations (UCO) confirmed. The captain of one of the 2 ships reported the vessel was approached by an IRGC gunboat and fired upon, causing heavy damage to the bridge with no prior warning. The 2 seized ships were identified as the MSC Francesca and the MSC Epomandas, both international commercial container ships. A 3rd ship, the Euphoria, was shot in the engine room and is currently drifting in a dangerous condition off the coast of Iran, unable to move, unable to save itself. Iran justified this action by accusing the ships of operating without authorization, violating regulations, and manipulating navigation systems. The MSC Francesca specifically was given a special label having links to the Zionist regime. Iran declared it was in full control of the Strait of Hormuz. Satellite imagery shows that Bandar Abbas, IN's largest port near the strait, remains the last remaining base for the IRGC's fast attack boat fleet, with hundreds of high-speed boats hidden in warehouses along the port shore, and some submarines in dry dock with unclear operational status. White House spokesperson Caroline Leavitt reacted briefly and accurately. Iran has gone from having the strongest navy in the Middle East to behaving like pirates. Now, let's peel back the layers of this event, because there is more going on here than what shows on the surface. To understand why the IRGC did this, first you need to understand what they are working with. Trump claimed 158 Iranian warships have been destroyed since the conflict began. What remains at Bandar Abbas are hundreds of high-speed boats, not a naval force, but a tool for harassment. And with those tools, seizing an unarmed container ship only requires one or two high-speed boats, a few minutes of approach, and a burst of gunfire at the bridge. No navy required, no missiles required, just audacity. But look at how Iran arranged the minefields, because that is the most important clue to understanding the real strategy behind all these actions. The minefields are not spread continuously across the entire Strait of Hormuz. They are placed purposefully at specific locations, creating a narrow corridor that forces commercial shipping close to the Iranian coast, exactly into the area where IRGC high-speed boats can easily approach and intercept. This is not a defensive weapon. It is a traffic directing tool designed to bring prey into reach. However, and this is a detail no strategist could have come up with if writing a script, Iran itself has admitted they have lost track of their own mines. They no longer know exactly where those mines are located. A regime that sets traps and then forgets where its traps are is not a regime in control of the situation. It is a regime being controlled by the consequences of its own decisions. Iran currently cannot reopen the Strait of Hormuz, even if it wanted to. Not because the US is preventing it, but because its own mines are imprisoning it in a situation with no safe way out. But the most important layer of analysis is not military capability or minefields. It is timing. The IRGC conducted the ship seizures immediately after the US announced the ceasefire extension. Not before, immediately after. And when you place that in the context of the escalating internal between Paskai Chakchai and the IRGC leadership under Vahiti, the picture becomes much clearer. The act of seizing cargo ships was not a reaction to the US. It was a message sent internally. The IRGC is signaling to all other factions within the regime that they, not Arakchi, not Pzeskian, are the ones in control of policy at the Strait of Hormuz, that any diplomatic signal from the civilian side can be neutralized by the IRGC in a few hours by a military action. This is exactly what happened when Foreign Minister Arakchi declared on April 17th that the strait was completely open to commercial ships. And just a day later, the IRGC declared it closed again, completely overwriting the foreign minister's statement in front of the entire world. And labeling the MSC Francesca as having links to the Zionist regime is not a legal basis either. No international court would accept that reasoning. It is domestic propaganda designed to justify the action before the Iranian public at home. When a military force needs propaganda to legitimize its behavior to its own people, it is a sign of an organization losing its certainty in its own legitimacy. And finally, one cannot fail to mention a historical irony so complete it is almost unbelievable. Iran is the nation that supported Houthi forces in Yemen and pirate groups in Somalia to seize international cargo ships for decades. That was an asymmetric tactic that TAN funded, trained, and provided weapons for others to execute. Today, the IRGC is man-executing that very tactic and calling it maritime regulation enforcement. The message the IRGC wants to send to the world is very clear. We still control horses. We are still here. We still have the ability to cause harm. But the real message these actions are sending is completely different. A regime using military action to resolve internal power struggles. Using unarmed container ships as props to prove to domestic allies that it still has power, not dealing with a superpower that is patiently waiting outside. And while the IRGC is using high-speed boats to prove its remaining power to its internal ranks, The US is doing something entirely different during the same period. On the same day, April 22nd, the US Central Command CENTCOM released a video with a brief message that did not hide its intent. We are re-equipping, adjusting tactics, and no military in the world adapts as fast as we do. It was not a declaration of victory. It was not a threat. It was a calm announcement that the ceasefire period is being used to better prepare for whatever happens next on the ground. That picture is being realized through specific platforms. P-8 Paikadans continue constant surveillance flights with refueling support from KC-135 Strat tankers scanning the entire waters from high altitudes with advanced radar sonobuoy and electro-optical sensors, not missing a single movement of any ship in the region. RQ-4 Global Hawks and the naval variant, the MQ-4C Triton, maintain ISR 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with the capability of loitering continuously for over 30 hours without landing, tracking every remaining IRGC fast attack craft from an altitude that no Iranian air defense system can reach. All three variants of the F-35 are present in the region. The Air Force's A variant from regional bases. The Marine Corps' B variant launched from Marine Expeditionary Unit amphibious assault ships close to the coast, and the Navy's C variant launched from the Carrier Strike Group offshore. And that entire network is connected by the Aegis system on Arleigh Burke class destroyers, the backbone of the US surface fleet, integrating data from all the aforementioned platforms into a unified real-time operational picture. And then there was an event that many overlooked or misinterpreted. U.S. Secretary of the Navy John Phelan was removed from office effective immediately right during the ceasefire. Now understand why all these things, when viewed together, create a strategic picture completely different from what is on the surface. The ceasefire is not a gap in the conflict. It is a phase in which the US is actively upgrading its posture comprehensively and systematically. The P-8s and RQ-4s are not just monitoring. They are building a complete intelligence picture of every remaining IRGC Navy fast attack craft. Every minefield with an unidentified location and every weakness in the Iranian naval chain of command. Every flight hour of the P-8, every loitering circle of the RQ-4 is an hour of data added to that picture, making the targeting solution for any subsequent attack more precise, more complete, and leaving fewer gaps. The F-35 triple combo creates a tactical problem that Iran has no solution for. The B variant from MEU amphibious ships can approach the coast and attack from angles that coastal air defense systems were not designed to handle. The C variant from the Carrier Strike Group can attack from offshore with a reach and payload that no IRGC platform can stop. The A variant from regional air bases creates a third entirely independent attack vector. 3 directions, 3 different platforms, all part of the same real-time data sharing network through Aegis. This is not a collection of disjointed weapons. This is an integrated combat system where each component amplifies the effectiveness of all the others. And replacing Navy Secretary Phelan with immediate effect in the middle of a ceasefire is not chaos. It is a signal of deliberate command restructuring. When you replace leadership right in the middle of a conflict, you are not resolving an internal crisis. You are preparing the command apparatus for the next phase. Whether that phase is negotiation or escalation, it is the action of an organization looking forward, not reacting to the present. The CENTCOM video was not internal propaganda to maintain troop morale. It was a carefully calculated message sent directly to Thrawn and to everyone watching. The ceasefire does not mean the US is hesitating. It does not mean Washington is looking for an exit. And it does not mean the pressure is easing. It means the US is using this time to become more dangerous. And here is the deepest strategic implication of this entire phase. For every day the ceasefire lasts, the capability gap between the two sides does not remain static. It continues to widen. Iran is losing financial resources, losing command unity, and losing the ability to maintain its forces. The US is accumulating intelligence, refining tactics, and restructuring its command apparatus. Two opposing trajectories running in parallel, and each passing day makes the distance between them a little bit larger.